Hello and welcome back to Learn the Bible in a Year for February 8th, 2026. Happy National Kite Flying Day to you. Also, February 8th happens to be the day that the Boy Scouts of America was first founded in 1910. So let's share this episode with your friend today that you think would make the best Boy Scout. Today, we are in a new book. We're starting the book of Exodus. We're reading chapters 1, 2, and 3. We're also continuing in the book of Matthew, chapter 26, verses 1 through 30. And then capping off today in Psalms chapter 19, verses 1 through 6. Now, let's go ahead and jump into today's recap. All right, like I said, we're starting a brand new book. It's the book of Exodus. So if you think about the entire Bible as a whole book, the book of Genesis is basically like an introduction, and the story really begins in the book of Exodus. And Exodus is all about deliverance. The name literally means the way out. This book tells the story of how God rescued his people from slavery in Egypt, gave them the law at Mount Sinai, and began forming them into a nation. And it's a really foundational book for understanding God's character, his covenant with Israel, and ultimately how he works in redemption. So the story starts here. Let's pick it up in chapter 1, and this happens centuries after Joseph dies. Remember, Jacob's family, Jacob is Joseph's father, they moved to Egypt during a famine, and 70 people in total were part of that family. Now, hundreds of years later, they've multiplied into a massive population. A new Pharaoh rises to power who doesn't remember Joseph or what he did for Egypt, and he sees the Israelites as a threat. They are numerous and they are strong. What would happen if they were to side with their enemies during a war? So Pharaoh enslaves them. He puts them to ruthless labor, making bricks and working fields. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied. So Pharaoh eventually gets desperate and he tells the Hebrew midwives named Shifra and Puah, like Winnie the Pooh, to kill every baby at birth. But the midwives feared God more than they feared Pharaoh, and they let the boys live. When questioned, they claimed Hebrew women gave birth so quickly that they were late to arrive. Interestingly, this is just kind of a side note. I was having a fun argument with a friend of mine who's also a Christian, and the question posed was, is it ever okay to lie? There's this big debate out there on lying is always wrong versus God sometimes blesses lying. A very famous example is, if you were somebody, harboring Jews during World War II and a Nazi came to your house and knocked on the door and said, are there any Jews here? It would be okay to lie and say, no, there wasn't, because you're protecting the lives of the Jews. Anyway, so we had this big debate, this big argument. I tended to side on the side of the argument where it's really never okay to lie, whereas my friend said it's okay to lie under certain circumstances. But what put this debate to rest for me was actually these midwives in this story. The midwives lied and they claimed that the Hebrew women gave birth so quickly that they were late to arrive. And the text specifically says that the Lord blessed this action. So for me, that kind of settles that whole debate. It actually is okay to lie when the Lord specifically tells you to lie. But, anyways, that's kind of just a side note there. Continuing on in the story, Pharaoh then orders all of his people to throw every Hebrew baby boy into the Nile River. And this sets up chapter 2. A Levite woman has a son and hides him for 3 months. And when she can't hide him any longer, she makes a papyrus basket, makes it waterproof, and then puts the baby in it among the reeds along the Nile River, the very place where Pharaoh ordered babies to be thrown in. Pharaoh's daughter comes down to the Nile River to bathe and she finds the basket. She realizes it's a Hebrew baby. The baby's sister, who's watching nearby, which I guess would be little baby Moses' older sister, asks if she should go and get a Hebrew woman to nurse the child. Pharaoh's daughter agrees. So the sister gets the baby's own mother. So Pharaoh's daughter pays Moses' mother to nurse her own child. When he's older, he's brought to Pharaoh's daughter, and she names him Moses, which sounds like the Hebrew word for draw out, because she drew him out of the water. Moses grows up in Pharaoh's palace, but he knows that he is a Hebrew. It's not like some hidden secret. As an adult, he actually sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. So Moses looks around and he sees that nobody's watching, and then he kills the Egyptian and hides the body in the sand. The next day, he sees two Hebrews fighting amongst themselves, and he tries to intervene, but one of them asks, "Who made you a ruler or a judge over us? Are you going to kill us just like you killed that Egyptian?" Moses realizes that his murder is known, and he flees to a land called Midian. He sits by a well. Wells are significant meeting places in the ancient world, and then the seven daughters of a Midianite priest come up to water their father's flock. Shepherds drive them away, but Moses stands up for them and waters their flock, meaning he stands up for the daughters of the priest. Their father, who is named Ruel, also called Jethro, invites Moses to stay. Moses ends up marrying one of the daughters, who's called Zipporah, and they have a son named Gershom, which sounds like foreigner, because Moses is an alien in a foreign land. Meanwhile, in Egypt, that Pharaoh dies, the Israelites groan under slavery and cry out to God. And God hears their groaning and remembers his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He sees the Israelites and is concerned about them. Then we're in chapter 3. Moses is tending his father in law's flock near Harim, the Mount of God. And this is where Moses stumbles upon the famous burning bush. The bush is burning, but it's actually not being consumed. Moses goes to investigate, but God calls him from the bush. He says, "Moses, Moses." Then Moses responds, "Here I am." God tells him to take off his sandals because he's standing on holy ground. Then God identifies himself. He says, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Moses hides his face because he is afraid. God says he's seen the misery of his people in Egypt. He's heard their cries and he is concerned. And now he has come down to rescue them and bring them to a good and spacious land flowing with milk and honey. And Moses, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt. Well, now Moses is pretty terrified. He says, "Who am I to go to Pharaoh?" God says, "I will be with you." Moses then asks, "If they ask what your name is, what should I tell them?" And God responds with one of the more famous and almost more funny lines. He says, "I am who I am. That's my name. Tell them that I am sent you." This name, which means Yahweh or Jehovah, means I am or I will be. It's the personal covenant name of God. He's the self existing one who always was, always is, and always will be. This is the God who enters relationship with his people. Little funsies there about names. All right, that took quite a while. Let's jump now into Matthew chapter 26, and we read verses 1 through 30. Jesus finishes his teaching and tells his disciples the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. Meanwhile, the chief priests and elders are plotting to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him, but they say not during the festival, or there might be a riot. Jesus is in Bethany at Simon the leper's house. A woman comes with an alabaster jar of a very expensive perfume and pours it on his head while he's reclining at the table. The disciples are indignant. They say this is such a waste. This could have been sold and the money given to the poor. But Jesus defends the woman. He says, "Why are you bothering this woman? She's done a beautiful thing. You will always have the poor, but you won't always have me. She has prepared my body for burial. Wherever the gospel is preached, what she has done will be told in memory of her." Then Judas Iscariot goes to the chief priests and asks what they will give him if he hands Jesus over. They count out 30 pieces of silver, which happens to be the price of a slave in that culture. From then on, Judas watches for an opportunity to betray Jesus. On the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples asked where Jesus wants them to prepare the Passover meal. He gives them very specific instructions about finding a man carrying a jar of water, which would be unusual because typically women did that, and following him to a house where they will find a room already ready. They prepare a meal. While eating, Jesus drops a big bomb. He says, "One of you will betray me." Of course, they're devastated and started asking one by one, "Surely I will not, Lord." Jesus says, "The one who's dipped his hand in the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go as it is written, but woe to the man who betrays him. It would be better if he hadn't been born at all." And Judas asks, "Surely not I, Rabbi," little slippery devil there. And Jesus says, "You have said so." And while they're eating, Jesus takes bread and gives thanks and breaks it and gives it to his disciples. "Take and eat." He says, "This is my body." Then he takes a cup and gives thanks and offers it and says, "Drink all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." This is the Last Supper scene, which is quite famous. Jesus is transforming the Passover meal. Passover celebrated Israel's deliverance from Egypt when the angel of death passed over the homes marked by the lamb's blood. But now Jesus is establishing a new covenant where he is the lamb who brings the blood of deliverance from sin and death. The bread represents his body, which is broken. The wine represents his blood poured out. This meal becomes what we call communion, or the Lord's Supper for Christians, a regular reminder of what Jesus did and a looking forward to his return. All right, we finished up in Psalms chapter 19 and we read verses 1 through 6. David writes about how creation declares God's glory. The heavens proclaim it. The skies display his craftsmanship. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, no words, no sound, yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the end of the world. There's something called general revelation in theology. This is the idea that God reveals himself through creation so that everyone, everywhere, can know something about him. You don't necessarily need a Bible or a preacher. Just look at the sky, the order, the beauty, the complexity that all point to the Creator. As Paul says in the book of Romans, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen from what's been made, so people are without excuse. All right, let's hear a quick word from our sponsor. We are sponsored by Covenant Security Equipment, which is a Christian owned company that partners with building contractors who build with safety in mind. They sell to these building contractors bullet resistant windows, secure transaction systems, drive through installations, and much, much more. If this is of interest to you, go to covenantsecurityequipment.com. And also, don't forget to pick up a copy of the Learn the Bible in a Year workbook. I, in fact, did write this book and I wrote it for you who listen to this podcast. The book comes with additional questions and fun facts about our daily readings. The digital version of the book is 100% for free. You can also pick up the paperback version, which unfortunately is not free because it does cost money to print paper, turns out. But you can get the link to both of those books in the show notes, so go ahead and jump into there. And I know this episode has gone a little bit longer than our episodes normally do, so I apologize for that, I guess. My main takeaway from today's episode was the Last Supper from Jesus. Just remembering that they celebrated Passover to remember a time where they were spared because of the blood of a sacrificial lamb. God's wrath spared them because of a sacrifice. And now Jesus is making a new covenant, or I guess he's really just bringing that covenant full circle where all of us get to be passed by the wrath of God because of the one and ultimate sacrifice of Jesus. When it comes to the whole story of the Bible, and we're going to be reading the whole Bible this year, but the whole story of the Bible comes down to this crescendo, to this one point. Jesus' sacrifice is for all people for all time. We need to put our faith, hope, and trust in him, and then the wrath of God will pass over us because of the perfect sacrifice that Jesus made. Alrighty, well, that's the end of the episode for today, and I will see all of you cool cats again tomorrow.